The year was 1838, and the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee held secrets in their mist-covered peaks. Secrets of blood, of betrayal, and of a lone man who thought his heart had died 3 years before. Caleb Thornwood sat by his campfire that cold April night, the flames casting shadows across his weathered face. His beard was thick and unkempt, streaked with early gray despite his 30 years. His hands, calloused and scarred from a decade of mountain living, worked methodically to skin the rabbit he'd caught that afternoon. The muscles in his forearms bunched and flexed with each practiced movement. This was his life now. Solitary, simple, safe from the pain that came with caring too much. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of rain. Caleb looked up at the darkening sky, calculating. He'd make it back to his cabin before the storm hit if he left now. He kicked dirt over the fire and stood, his 6-foot frame unfolding like a great bear rising from sleep. The buckskin shirt stretched across his broad chest as he gathered his rifle and game bag. That's when he heard it. The sound rode the wind like a distant thunder, but Caleb knew thunder. This was different, sharper, more deliberate. Gunfire. Multiple shots echoing through the mountain passes, followed by the panicked screaming of horses and the unmistakable cry of human terror. Caleb froze, every instinct telling him to mount his horse and ride the other direction. 3 years of solitude had taught him that other people brought nothing but heartache. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, kneeling beside Margaret's grave with dirt still under his fingernails from digging it. But the screaming continued, growing weaker, more desperate. Caleb cursed under his breath and swung onto his horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Patience. She'd earned her name by tolerating his black moods these past 3 years. He kicked her flanks, and she responded, picking her way down the rocky slope toward the sounds of violence. The gunfire had stopped by the time he reached the narrow ravine where the old trading road cut through the mountains. What he found there would haunt him for days to come, though not in the way he expected. Bodies. 5 of them, scattered across the trail like broken dolls tossed by an angry child. The metallic smell of blood hung heavy in the air, mixing with the damp earth and pine needles. Caleb dismounted slowly, rifle ready, his eyes scanning the darkening forest for any sign of the attackers. Nothing moved except the branches swaying in the rising wind. He approached the first body cautiously. A man in his 40s, dressed in the plain clothes of a frontier escort, shot twice in the chest. The ground around him was dark with blood. Caleb moved to the next. Another escort, this one older, with gray in his beard. Throat cut, quick and brutal. The third and fourth bodies were different. They wore decorated buckskin, and even in death, their faces held the proud features of the Apache people. Caleb had seen Apache warriors before, years ago when he'd traveled through New Mexico territory. But what were they doing here, 2,000 miles from their homeland? The fifth body was another escort, face down in the dirt. But then Caleb heard it. A sound so faint, he almost missed it beneath the wind's whisper. A soft moan, barely human, coming from the thick brush 20 yards off the trail. His heart hammered as he approached, rifle raised. He'd seen enough ambushes to know that wounded men could still kill. But when he pushed aside the branches of a fallen oak, what he found wasn't a man at all. She lay half buried beneath the tree's thick limbs, her buckskin dress torn and stained with blood. Her long black hair was matted with dirt and dried blood from a wound on her scalp. Her left shoulder showed the ugly furrow of a bullet graze, still seeping red. But it was her face that struck Caleb like a physical blow. Even unconscious, even covered in the evidence of violence, she was beautiful. High cheekbones, full lips now pale from blood loss, skin the color of burnished copper. And she was alive. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her, setting his rifle aside. His hands, which had held nothing gentle in 3 years, moved with surprising care as he checked for other injuries. The head wound looked worse than it was, he hoped. Scalp wounds always bled heavily. The shoulder would need cleaning and binding, but the bullet had only grazed the flesh. He lifted the heavy oak limbs off her carefully. She must have crawled here after being shot, seeking shelter in her dying moments. As he pulled the last branch away, her eyes fluttered open. They were the deepest brown he'd ever seen, like polished mahogany, but right now they were filled with pure terror. She saw his bearded face looming over her, and her survival instinct kicked in. Her hand shot out, and suddenly, Caleb found himself staring at the blade of a small knife, its edge wickedly sharp. She said something in Apache, her voice weak but fierce. The knife trembled in her hand, but her eyes held the determination of a cornered wildcat. Caleb raised his hand slowly, making himself as unthreatening as a 6-foot mountain man could manage. He reached into his memory for the few words of Cherokee he'd learned years ago. The languages weren't the same, but sometimes the tones and gestures could communicate what words couldn't. "I'm not your enemy," he said slowly, keeping his voice low and steady. "My name is Caleb Thornwood. I want to help you." She stared at him, the knife still raised between them. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. She was trying to decide whether to trust him or use her last strength to bury that blade in his throat. Caleb did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He smiled. It felt strange on his face, like wearing an old coat that no longer quite fit. "You're hurt bad. If I wanted you dead, I'd just leave you here. But I'm not going to do that." Perhaps she understood his tone, if not his words. Perhaps she simply had no strength left to fight. The knife slipped from her fingers and her eyes rolled back. She collapsed against him, unconscious once more. Caleb caught her, feeling how light she was despite being a grown woman. He could count her ribs through the torn buckskin. She and her companions had been traveling hard, eating little, running from something or running toward something. Either way, they'd run straight into an ambush. He carried her to his horse as the first drops of rain began to fall. Patience nickered nervously at the smell of blood, but held steady as Caleb lifted the woman into the saddle and climbed up behind her. He settled her against his chest, one arm holding her secure while the other guided the reins. "My cabin's 2 miles north," he said to the unconscious woman, though he didn't know why he felt the need to explain. "It's not much, but it's dry and warm. I've got herbs and clean water. I can help you. I couldn't help Margaret, but maybe I can help you." The rain came harder as they rode, washing some of the blood from her face and hair. Caleb urged patience faster, knowing that shock and blood loss could still kill her even if the bullet wound wasn't fatal. The sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise by the time his cabin came into view, a small structure of logs and stone nestled against the mountainside. Inside, he laid her on the bed. His bed. Margaret's bed. The first person to lie there since he'd watched Margaret take her last labored breath in this very spot. His hands shook slightly as he lit the oil lamp and began heating water over the hearth. The wound on her shoulder needed attention first. He cut away the torn buckskin, trying not to notice the smooth curve of her collarbone, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. This was a patient, nothing more. He'd helped injured hunters before, set broken bones, stitched knife wounds. This was no different, except it felt different. He cleaned the wound with whiskey first, knowing it would hurt even in her unconscious state. She moaned and tried to pull away, but didn't wake. Good. The cleaning would be easier if she stayed under. He worked quickly but carefully, packing the furrow with a poultice of golden seal and yarrow he kept dried and hanging from the rafters. The Cherokee healer who'd taught him these remedies had saved his life once. Now maybe they'd save hers. The head wound was next. He washed away the dried blood, revealing a nasty gash along her hairline, but shallow. It had already stopped bleeding. He applied more herbs and wrapped her head with clean cloth torn from one of his spare shirts. Only when she was bandaged and covered with his warmest blanket did Caleb allow himself to step back and really look at her. She was Apache. That much was clear from the intricate beadwork on what remained of her dress, from the silver pendant at her throat bearing symbols he didn't recognize. But what was she doing in Tennessee? What had she been running from? And who had wanted her dead badly enough to slaughter an entire escort party? The questions would have to wait. Right now she needed rest and warmth and time for her body to heal. Caleb built up the fire and set a pot of rabbit stew to simmer. He'd barely eaten all day, but suddenly found he had no appetite. Instead, he sat in the old rocking chair by the hearth, his rifle across his knees, and watched the woman sleep. The night crept by slowly. Several times she cried out in her sleep, words in Apache that he couldn't understand, but whose terror needed no translation. Each time Caleb rose and checked her wounds, placed a cool cloth on her forehead, murmured reassurances that she probably couldn't hear. Strange, how natural it felt to care for someone again. Strange, and more than a little frightening. As dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold, she finally stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing first on the rough-hewn ceiling beams, then on the stone fireplace, and finally on Caleb sitting in his chair across the room. He'd dozed off some time before dawn, but woke the moment her breathing changed. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then she tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her shoulder, and fell back against the pillow. "Easy," Caleb said, rising and moving to the bedside. "You took a bullet. Well, almost took a bullet. It grazed you pretty good, though." She watched him approach with those deep brown eyes, alert now but still wary. When he reached for the water pitcher on the bedside table, she flinched. "Just water," he said, pouring some into a tin cup. "You need to drink." He held the cup to her lips, and she drank, tentatively at first, then with growing desperation. She drained the cup, and he refilled it twice more before her thirst was satisfied. Then she spoke, and to his surprise, her English was perfect, though accented with the musical lilt of her native tongue. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they opened a door between them. "You're welcome," Caleb replied, setting the cup down. "How do you feel?" "Like I was shot and left for dead." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "Which I suppose I was." "Do you remember what happened?" Her smile vanished. "All of it. Every terrible moment." Caleb pulled the rocking chair closer to the bed and sat. "I'm listening, if you want to talk about it." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide how much to trust this bearded stranger who'd saved her life. Finally, she spoke. "My name is Ayanna, daughter of Chief Dakota of the Mescalero Apache." Caleb felt his eyebrows rise. "That's a long way from home." 2,000 miles, she agreed. "And I would give anything to be back there now." "What brought you to Tennessee?" Ayanna's hands clenched the blanket. "A man named Ezekiel Blackwood. Do you know him?" Caleb shook his head. "Name means nothing to me. I don't get to town much." "Consider yourself fortunate." Bitterness crept into her voice. "Blackwood is a land speculator, a merchant of lies and broken promises. He came to our lands 3 years ago with papers claiming ownership of 5,000 acres of Apache territory. Land that my people have lived on for generations. Land that holds sacred sites and hunting grounds in the graves of our ancestors." "Let me guess," Caleb said. "The papers were legal." "Oh yes, very legal, complete with stamps and signatures from officials in Washington. All of it fake, we learned later. But by the time we discovered the fraud, Blackwood had already begun selling parcels to settlers and mining companies. Our land sits atop a gold deposit, you see, worth perhaps $2 million, if the estimates are correct." Caleb whistled low. "That's enough money to make men do terrible things." "Indeed." Ayanna shifted slightly, wincing. "My father, Chief Dakota, is not a violent man. He believes in the law, in negotiation, in finding peaceful solutions. So he gathered evidence of Blackwood's fraud. He collected documents, testimonies, proof that the land grants were forgeries. And he sent me and my Uncle Cale to Washington to present our case to the courts." "You went all the way to the Capitol?" "We did. And we won. The courts ruled in our favor. They declared Blackwood's grants void and ordered the land returned to our people." For the first time, genuine warmth entered her voice. "I thought it was over. I thought justice had prevailed. We started the journey home, my uncle and I, with our escort of 3 good men who'd been hired to protect us. We carried the court documents, the proof of our victory. But someone didn't want you to make it home, Caleb said quietly. Ayanna's eyes glistened with unshed tears. We were 5 days from Washington when they attacked. It was just after dawn. We'd camped for the night in what seemed like a safe hollow. The escort men were preparing breakfast when the first shots came. So many shots. The bullets came from everywhere at once. She paused, swallowing hard. Caleb waited, giving her time. Uncle Cale pushed me toward the trees, told me to run. I heard him cry out behind me, heard the sound of his body falling. But I ran. I'm ashamed to say it, but I ran like a coward while my uncle died. That's not cowardice, Caleb said firmly. That's survival. That's what he wanted you to do. I hid in the brush, listening to them search for me. They knew I was there. One of them, a big man with a scar across his face, he kept shouting that Blackwood would pay $1,000 for my head. That's what my life is worth to them. $1,000. Caleb felt anger kindle in his chest, a hot coal of rage that he hadn't felt since Margaret died. They won't get it. You're safe here. Am I? Ayanna looked directly into his eyes. Can anyone be safe when men like Blackwood exist? When justice can be bought and sold? Before Caleb could answer, she continued, But I haven't told you everything. The documents we carried, the proof of our victory. Uncle Cale hid them before he died. I saw him stuffing something into his leather bag and pushing it under a rock. I need to go back. I need to retrieve those papers. Without them, my people have no proof. Blackwood will claim we were simply murdered by common bandits. He'll take our land, and there will be nothing anyone can do to stop him. You can't go back there, Caleb said. Not yet. You're in no condition to ride, and those men will be watching the site. Then what do you suggest? Frustration and pain mingled in her voice. That I hide here while my people lose everything? I suggest you heal first. Then we figure out a plan. Caleb stood and moved to the hearth, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. But right now, you need to eat. Can't make plans on an empty stomach. He brought her the bowl and helped her sit up enough to eat, propping her against the pillows. She took the spoon in her right hand, her left arm useless with the injured shoulder, and ate slowly. The rabbit stew was simple fare, but she consumed it like it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. When did you last eat? Caleb asked. Caleb. Yesterday morning, maybe the morning before. The days blur together. She scraped the bowl clean and looked up at him. You're very kind, Mr. Thornwood. Just Caleb. He took the empty bowl from her. And I'm not kind. I'm just a man who found someone who needed help. That's the definition of kindness, she said softly. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Caleb busied himself cleaning the bowl, acutely aware of her watching him. Finally, she spoke again. You live alone here? I do. By choice? Caleb's hands stilled in the wash basin. Not exactly. My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her. I couldn't save her. He didn't know why he was telling her this. He never talked about Margaret. Not to Sam, not to anyone. But something about Ayanna's directness, her own pain, made the words come easier. After that, I didn't much see the point of being around people anymore. I'm sorry, Ayanna said. Grief is a heavy burden to carry alone. So is betrayal and injustice, seems to me. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. Perhaps we're both carrying heavy things, Caleb Thornwood. Perhaps we are. Over the next hours, as the sun climbed higher, they talked. Caleb found himself telling her things he'd never planned to share. About Margaret, about the years of happiness they'd had before the fever came. About building this cabin together, log by log. About the loneliness that had become as familiar as his own skin. Ayanna, in turn, told him about life in the Apache territories, about the desert landscape so different from these green mountains, about her father's wisdom and her younger brother's mischievous spirit, about the dances around evening fires and the songs that had been sung for generations. She spoke of a life rich with community and tradition, now threatened by a greedy man's schemes. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Caleb helped Ayanna stand and walk a few steps, testing her strength. She was unsteady but determined, and he found himself impressed by her resilience. When she needed to relieve herself, he helped her outside to the small outhouse behind the cabin, then gave her privacy and helped her back inside when she called. While she rested again, Caleb went out to tend to patients and check the area around his cabin. What he found made his blood run cold. Fresh hoof prints in the soft earth near the creek. 3 horses had been here, probably while he and Ayanna were talking. They'd circled the cabin at a distance, then headed back toward the road. Someone was hunting her, and they were getting close. He went back inside and found Ayanna trying to dress herself in clothes he'd laid out. One of his old shirts hung on her like a dress, and she'd managed to pull on a pair of his smaller trousers, though they bunched around her waist where she'd tied them with rope. She looked up as he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her own expression turn grave. "They've found us," she said. It wasn't a question. "They've been here, probably scouting while I was distracted." He cursed himself for being careless. "We need to leave, tonight." "Where will we go?" "I have a friend, Sam Brennan. He's Cherokee, lives about 15 miles north. He's got connections, knows people. He might be able to help us figure out our next move." Ayanna nodded, then swayed slightly. Caleb steadied her with a hand on her good shoulder. "I can ride," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you can. Apache are born on horseback from what I've heard." He guided her back to the chair. "But we've got a few hours before dark. Rest now. Build your strength. We'll ride when the moon rises." She didn't argue, which told him how much pain she was really in. As she dozed in the chair, Caleb prepared for their departure. He packed his saddlebags with supplies, checked and rechecked his rifle and pistol, and stuffed extra ammunition into every pocket. He looked around the cabin, at the life he'd built here with Margaret and maintained in solitude after her death. Something told him he wouldn't be coming back. As dusk painted the sky purple and orange, Caleb prepared a quick meal of cornbread and dried venison. Ayanna woke and ate mechanically, clearly forcing herself to consume food her body needed, even though fear had killed her appetite. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. Both of them knew the danger they faced. When full darkness fell and the moon rose like a silver coin in the eastern sky, Caleb helped Ayanna mount Patience. She bit her lip against the pain but made no sound. He swung up behind her, settling her against his chest so he could support her weight and still control the horse. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but let's go anyway." They rode into the night, leaving the cabin dark and silent behind them. Caleb chose game trails and creek beds, paths that would leave minimal tracks. Ayanna dozed against him, exhausted by pain and stress. He found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the weight of her in his arms, the faint scent of herbs and something else, something uniquely her that rose from her hair. They'd been riding for perhaps 2 hours when Patience suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. Caleb felt his gut clench. The horse had sensed something. Then he heard it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats behind them, multiple riders coming fast. "Hold on," he whispered to Ayanna, who jerked awake at the horse's movement. "We've got company." He urged Patience off the trail and into a dense thicket of mountain laurel, dismounting and putting his hand over the horse's nose to keep her quiet. Ayanna slid down beside him, her good hand reaching instinctively for the knife at her belt. The knife she'd dropped when he'd found her. She had no weapon. Caleb pressed his pistol into her hand. "You know how to use this?" "My father taught me," she whispered back. The hoofbeats grew louder. 3 riders appeared on the moonlit trail, silhouettes against the pale light. One of them was huge, easily Caleb's size or bigger. Even in the dim light, Caleb could make out what might be a scar running down the man's face. "She's close," the big man growled. "Horse tracks lead this way." "We should split up," another voice suggested. "Cover more ground." "No." The big man's voice held authority. "Blackwood wants her dead, but he wants proof. We bring back her head. We get paid. Stay together." They rode past the thicket, so close that Caleb could have reached out and touched the nearest horse. He held his breath, felt Ayanna doing the same beside him. Patience, bless her steady heart, remained perfectly still. The riders continued down the trail, and their sounds faded into the distance. Caleb waited a full 5 minutes before moving, making sure they were truly gone. "That was Silas Crenshaw," Ayanna whispered, her voice shaking. "The big one. He led the attack on our camp." "Then he's the one we need to avoid at all costs," Caleb replied. "Come on. We need to circle around them and head for Sam's place by a different route." They mounted again, and Caleb guided Patience deeper into the forest, away from the trails, picking their way through dense undergrowth and over fallen logs. It was slow, painstaking progress, but it was safer than being caught on an open path. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Sam Brennan's cabin, a sturdy structure built into the side of a hill with a rock face protecting its back. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the smell of frying bacon made Caleb's stomach growl. He realized they'd been riding for nearly 8 hours straight. Before they could dismount, the cabin door opened and Sam emerged, rifle in hand. He was a small man, barely 5.5 feet tall, with skin weathered to the color of old leather and long gray hair tied back with a strip of rawhide. His Cherokee heritage showed in his high cheekbones and the proud set of his shoulders despite his age of 68 years. When he saw Caleb, his weathered face split into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned." Caleb Thornwood finally emerges from his cave. Then his eyes shifted to Ayanna, and the grin faded. "And you've brought trouble with you. Come inside, quickly." Inside the cabin, which was surprisingly spacious and well-appointed, Sam helped Ayanna to a chair by the fire while Caleb tended to Patience. When Caleb returned, Sam had already set out plates of bacon, eggs, and fresh biscuits. Ayanna was eating carefully, trying not to show how ravenous she was. "So," Sam said, settling into his own chair with a cup of coffee, "you want to tell me why you've got an Apache princess, and why there are wanted posters with her face on them showing up in every town from here to Kentucky?" Caleb nearly dropped his coffee cup. "Wanted posters? Appeared yesterday. Rewards $1,500 now. Says she's wanted for murdering federal escorts and stealing government documents." Sam looked at Ayanna with sympathetic eyes. "But I'm guessing that's not quite how it happened." Ayanna set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "It's all lies. Blackwood must have put them up." "Ezekiel Blackwood," Sam said, nodding. "Thought his name might come up. That man's like a plague of locusts, consuming everything in his path." He turned to Caleb. "You've really stepped in it this time, my friend." "I couldn't just leave her to die," Caleb said. "No, you couldn't. Margaret taught you better than that." Sam took a long sip of coffee. "But helping her means going up against Blackwood. And that means going up against a man who's got half the territorial officials in his pocket, and the other half too scared to oppose him." "We need to get to the court documents," Ayanna said. "Without them, we have no proof of Blackwood's crimes." "Those documents are at the ambush site," Caleb added. "Her uncle hid them before he died." Sam stroked his chin thoughtfully. "That site'll be watched tighter than a miser's purse. Blackwood knows those papers could ruin him." He stood and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a hand-drawn map. "But there might be another way. You need someone with legal authority, someone Blackwood can't buy or intimidate, someone like Judge Meredith Hawthorne in Nashville." "A judge?" Ayanna's eyes widened. "Would she help us?" "She would," Sam said firmly. "Judge Hawthorne hates corruption with a passion that burns hotter than hellfire. She's put away 3 crooked officials in the last 2 years. Blackwood's tried to get her removed from the bench twice. She's still there because she's smarter than he is." Caleb studied the map. "Nashville's 60 miles from here, and we'd have to pass through Gatlinburg to get there." Where every bounty hunter and hired gun in 3 states is probably waiting, Sam finished. Yeah, it's a problem. He looked at Ayanna. You'd need a disguise. Something that makes you not look like an Apache princess. What did you have in mind? Ayanna asked. Sam rummaged in a trunk and pulled out a bundle of clothing. My late wife's things. She was Cherokee, about your size. Between these and a good hat to hide that hair, you might pass for a settler's wife. Might. While Ayanna changed behind a partition, Sam pulled Caleb aside. You know what you're getting into, right? This isn't just helping someone who's hurt. This is taking on a man with money, power, and no conscience. People who oppose Blackwood have a habit of disappearing. I know, Caleb said. But I can't walk away from this. From her. Sam studied his friend's face. This is the first time in 3 years I've seen that look in your eyes. Like you care about something again. That's good, Caleb. But it's also dangerous. Don't let caring get you killed. I'll be careful. That's what Margaret said before the fever took her. Sometimes careful isn't enough. Sam squeezed his shoulder. But I'll help however I can. You saved my life once. Time I paid that debt. Ayanna emerged from behind the partition, wearing a simple homespun dress and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. She looked completely different, more like a frontier woman than an Apache warrior's daughter, but her eyes still held that fierce determination. How do I look? She asked. Like someone who won't be recognized, Caleb said. That's good. Sam provided them with fresh supplies and a letter of introduction to Judge Hawthorne. As they prepared to leave, he had one more piece of advice. Watch out for a man named Wade Cooper. He's a corporal stationed at Fort Campbell, and word is he's on Blackwood's payroll. Trust no one in uniform until you know for certain where their loyalty lies. They left Sam's cabin as the sun climbed higher, heading south toward Nashville. The journey would take them 2 days if they rode hard and avoided the main roads. 2 days to reach safety, or 2 days to ride straight into a trap. Only time would tell which. As they rode, Caleb found himself glancing back at Ayanna often, checking to make sure she was holding up. She met his eyes each time and gave him a small nod of reassurance. They didn't talk much during those long hours in the saddle. Words seemed unnecessary. They'd formed an unspoken bond, forged in blood and fear, and the simple act of one person refusing to abandon another. By late afternoon, they'd covered nearly 20 miles and reached the outskirts of a small settlement called Mill Creek. Caleb debated whether to stop or press on, but patience was tiring, and Ayanna, though she'd never complain, was swaying in the saddle. They stopped at a small creek to water the horse and rest. Ayanna dismounted stiffly, her shoulder clearly paining her. Caleb checked the bandage and found it needed changing. He worked silently, cleaning the wound again and applying fresh herbs while she gritted her teeth against the pain. "You're very gentle," she said when he finished, "for such a large man. Margaret used to say my hands were too big for the work I did, but I learned to be careful." He secured the bandage. "How's the pain?" "Bearable. I've had worse." "When?" She smiled slightly. "When I was 12, I tried to break a wild horse. It threw me into a cactus patch. I had spines in places I didn't know I had places." Caleb found himself smiling back. "Bet that taught you a lesson." "Yes. It taught me to be more patient with wild things. They'll come to you eventually if you don't try to force them." The way she said it, looking directly at him, made Caleb wonder if they were still talking about horses. He cleared his throat and stood. "We should keep moving. Want to put a few more miles behind us before dark." They mounted again and continued south. The sun was touching the western peaks when disaster struck. They'd just rounded a bend in the trail when 3 riders emerged from the trees ahead, blocking their path. Caleb recognized the big one immediately. Silas Crenshaw, the scar on his face visible even at a distance. The bounty hunters had somehow gotten ahead of them. "Well, well," Silas called out, his voice carrying across the gap. "Caleb Thornwood, isn't it? The hermit of Smoky Mountain. Heard you'd taken up with the Apache girl. Blackwood's going to be real interested to hear about that." Caleb's hand moved to his rifle, but Silas was faster. His pistol cleared leather in a blur of motion, aimed not at Caleb but at Ayanna. "I wouldn't," Silas warned. "My boys here are a bit trigger-happy. Hate to see the little lady get shot because you did something foolish." "What do you want, Crenshaw?" Caleb kept his voice level, his mind racing through options. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The only advantage he had was knowing these mountains better than anyone. "You know what I want. The girl. Blackwood's paying good money for her, dead or alive, though he'd prefer dead." Silas grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Tell you what. You ride away right now, I'll let you live. This isn't your fight. I'm making it my fight. Your funeral." Silas raised his pistol, taking aim. What happened next occurred in the space of a heartbeat. Ayanna suddenly screamed, "Caleb!" and pointed to the left. Caleb reacted on instinct, yanking Patience's reins hard to the right, just as gunfire erupted from the trees on the left side. A fourth bounty hunter, hidden in ambush, had opened fire too soon, spooked by Ayanna's shout. The bullet meant for Caleb's head whizzed past his ear. Patience reared, and Caleb used her momentum to wheel around, heading back the way they'd come at a full gallop. More shots rang out behind them, bullets kicking up dirt around Patience's hooves. "Hold on!" Caleb shouted to Ayanna, who'd wrapped her good arm around his waist and pressed herself against his back. He guided Patience off the main trail and into a narrow deer path that wound between massive oak trees. Behind them, he heard Silas shouting orders and the thunder of pursuing hooves. The deer path led up a steep incline that made Patience labor but slowed their pursuers as well. Caleb pushed the horse hard, knowing that if they could reach the ridge ahead, they'd find a rocky area where horses couldn't easily follow. It was their only chance. Branches whipped at them as they climbed, and more than once Caleb had to duck low to avoid being swept from the saddle. Ayanna held on grimly, her injured shoulder screaming with pain, but her determination unshaken. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. Silas's horses were fresher, but not as sure-footed on this terrain as Patience. They crested the ridge just as the last light faded from the sky. Below them stretched a boulder field. Massive rocks tumbled from the peak centuries ago. Caleb dismounted and helped Ayanna down, then led Patience carefully into the maze of stone. "We'll shelter here tonight," he whispered. "They won't risk following us into this in the dark. Too easy to break a horse's leg." They found a small hollow between two massive boulders, barely big enough for them and the horse. Caleb unsaddled Patience and rubbed her down, knowing they'd need her strength tomorrow. Then he settled beside Ayanna, both of them listening tensely for any sound of approaching danger. Hours passed. The moon rose, painting the boulder field in shades of silver and shadow. In the distance they could hear Silas and his men calling to each other, their voices echoing strangely off the rocks. They were still searching, but they weren't finding. "That was quick thinking back there," Caleb said quietly, "spotting that fourth shooter." "I saw sunlight glint off his rifle barrel," Ayanna replied. "Just for a second, but it was enough." "You saved our lives. You've saved mine multiple times. I figure we're even." Caleb smiled in the darkness. "That's not how it works. This isn't a ledger to be balanced." "Then how does it work?" "I don't know. I just know that when you care about someone, you protect them. You don't keep score." Ayanna was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she said, "Do you care about me, Caleb?" It was a dangerous question, one that opened doors he'd thought he'd sealed shut forever. But sitting here in the darkness, with death hunting them and an uncertain future ahead, Caleb found he couldn't lie. "Yes," he said simply, "I do." She shifted beside him, and he felt her head rest gently against his shoulder. "Good, because I care about you too, and I think we're going to need each other before this is over." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind whisper through the rocks and the distant sounds of frustrated bounty hunters giving up their search. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. They'd have to reach Nashville, find Judge Hawthorne, and somehow retrieve the documents that could save Ayanna's people. But for now, in this moment, they were alive. They were together. And somehow, against all odds, Caleb Thornwood's frozen heart was beginning to thaw. The night deepened around them, and eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. They slept sitting up, leaning against each other for warmth and comfort, while patience stood guard and the stars wheeled overhead. And in that cold mountain hollow, surrounded by enemies and uncertainty, something precious was born. Hope. Dawn broke cold and gray over the boulder field, painting the massive stones in shades of pewter and rose. Caleb woke first, his back stiff from sleeping upright against the rock. Ayanna still slept against his shoulder, her breathing soft and even, despite the pain she must be feeling. He remained still, unwilling to disturb her rest, and took the opportunity to study her face in the growing light. Even battered and exhausted, she possessed a strength that showed in the set of her jaw, the proud line of her nose. This was no helpless victim. This was a woman who'd traveled 2,000 miles to fight for her people, who'd survived an ambush that killed 4 grown men, who'd faced down bounty hunters without flinching. Margaret would have liked her, he thought. The two women were nothing alike in appearance or background, but they shared that same core of steel. Ayanna's eyes opened, meeting his gaze without embarrassment at their closeness. "Morning," she said, her voice rough from sleep. "Morning. How's the shoulder?" She tested it carefully, rolling it slightly and wincing. "Stiff, sore, but I'll manage." She sat up straighter, looking around the boulder field. Did they give up? For now. But they'll pick up our trail again once there's enough light. Caleb stood, stretching muscles that protested the movement. "We need to get moving. There's a town called Copper Creek about 10 miles from here. We can get supplies, maybe hire a wagon. You shouldn't be riding horseback with that shoulder." "I can ride," Ayanna insisted, but her face was pale and drawn. "I know you can, but you don't have to prove anything to me." He helped her to her feet, supporting her when she swayed slightly. "Let's at least see what's available in Copper Creek." They saddled Patience and set out as the sun climbed higher, following game trails that wound down from the ridge. Caleb chose their path carefully, crossing streams to break their trail and staying under tree cover whenever possible. By mid-morning, they'd reached the outskirts of Copper Creek, a small settlement of perhaps 50 buildings clustered around a crossroads. Caleb felt his gut tighten as they rode into town. Too many eyes watching, too many places for enemies to hide. But they needed supplies, and Ayanna needed rest. He guided Patience to the general store, a weathered building with a sagging porch and windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. Inside, the store smelled of tobacco, leather, and dried goods. A woman stood behind the counter, perhaps 55 years old, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were sharp and assessing as Caleb and Ayanna entered. "Help you folks?" she asked, her tone neutral. "Need some supplies," Caleb said. "Dried meat, hardtack, coffee if you've got it." The woman began gathering items, but her eyes kept returning to Ayanna, who'd kept her hat pulled low and her face turned away. "You're a ways from home, aren't you?" the storekeeper said. Caleb tensed. "We're just passing through." "That so?" The woman set a package of dried beef on the counter. "Funny thing. Had some men through here yesterday asking about a couple matching your description. Big fellow with a scar, real unpleasant type. Said there was a reward." Caleb's hand moved closer to his rifle. "What did you tell them?" The woman's expression softened slightly. "Told them I hadn't seen anyone like that. Told them to get their bounty hunting business out of my store." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Martha Henshaw's my name, and I know Ezekiel Blackwood when I see his handiwork. That man's a snake in human form. Swindled my brother out of 200 acres 5 years back." Relief flooded through Caleb. "Then you know about him." "Half the folks in Tennessee know about him. Other half work for him, or are too scared to speak up." Martha glanced at Ayanna. You're the Apache girl from the wanted posters, aren't you? Ayanna lifted her head, meeting Martha's gaze directly. I am, but everything on those posters is a lie. Figured as much. Blackwood's never told the truth when a lie would serve him better. Martha added more items to their pile. You heading to Nashville? We are. Need to see Judge Hawthorne. Martha nodded approvingly. Smart. She's one of the few people in this territory who can't be bought. She wrapped their purchases in brown paper. Road to Nashville's being watched, but there's a back way, follows the old Cherokee trading route, longer but safer. I can draw you a map. We'd be grateful, Caleb said. As Martha sketched the route on a scrap of paper, the store's door opened and 3 men walked in. Caleb's blood ran cold. He recognized the posture, the predatory way their eyes swept the room. Bounty hunters, or hired guns. Maybe both. The lead man, thin as a rail with a hawk-like face, spotted them immediately. His hand moved toward the pistol at his hip as his eyes locked on Ayanna. Well now, he drawled, ain't this convenient? Martha's hand disappeared beneath the counter. When it reappeared, she was holding a double-barreled shotgun, both hammers cocked. The sound in the quiet store was loud as thunder. Get out of my store, Tanner, she said, her voice hard as iron. You and your rats. Tanner's eyes narrowed. That's the Apache girl. There's a reward. There's also a scatter gun pointed at your belly. You really want to test which is faster? Martha shifted slightly, the shotgun barrels tracking Tanner's movement. I'm a widow woman with no children. Shooting you 3 would be the most excitement I've had in years. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Tanner slowly raised his hands. No need for gunplay, Martha. We're just doing our job. Your job is leaving, now. The 3 men backed toward the door, their eyes never leaving Martha's shotgun. When they reached the threshold, Tanner paused. Blackwood ain't gonna like this. Blackwood can kiss my weathered behind, Martha replied. Now get. They left. Through the window, Caleb watched them mount their horses and ride slowly down the street, but they didn't go far. They stopped at the saloon across the way, tying their horses and settling onto the porch where they had a clear view of the general store. They'll wait us out, Caleb said grimly. Maybe not. Martha set the shotgun down and moved to the back of the store. I've got a wagon out back, old but serviceable. You take it and head out through the alley. They're watching the front, won't see you leave. We can't take your wagon, Ayanna protested. Sure you can. Bring it back when this is all over, or don't. Either way, I don't want to see that snake Blackwood win. Martha pushed the package of supplies into Caleb's arms. Now go, before they get suspicious. Caleb wanted to thank her properly, but Martha was already shooing them toward the back door. 5 minutes later, they were driving a creaky wagon pulled by a sway-backed mule named Ezra, following the alley that led to the old Cherokee trading route Martha had marked on her map. They'd gone perhaps a mile before Ayanna spoke. There are more good people than I expected. Most folks are decent, given the chance, Caleb replied. It's the ones like Blackwood who make the world ugly. But they're the minority, even if they're the loudest. The trading route proved easier on Ayanna than horseback would have been. She sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat, and when the pain in her shoulder became too much, she could lie down in the bed among the blankets Martha had thoughtfully included. The route took them through dense forest and along ridge lines that offered spectacular views of the Tennessee mountains rolling away in all directions like frozen waves in a green sea. They made good time, and by late afternoon had covered nearly 15 miles. Caleb was beginning to think they might actually make it to Nashville without further trouble when Ezra suddenly balked, his long ears swiveling forward as he brayed nervously. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. Easy, boy. What's got you spooked? Then he saw it. A man on horseback standing in the middle of the trail ahead. But this wasn't a bounty hunter. The rider wore the blue uniform of the United States Cavalry, and as he urged his horse forward, Caleb could make out the corporal's stripes on his sleeve. That would be Wade Cooper, Ayanna said quietly. The man Sam warned us about. Cooper rode closer, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. He was perhaps 35, with sandy hair and a forgettable face that probably served him well in his duplicitous work. His smile was friendly, but it never reached his eyes. "Afternoon, folks," he called. "I'm Corporal Wade Cooper, Fort Campbell. Mind if I ask where you're headed?" "Nashville," Caleb replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Got business there." Cooper's eyes swept over Ayanna, lingering on her face. "That's interesting. See, I'm looking for someone. Apache woman, wanted for murder. You wouldn't happen to have seen anyone like that?" "Can't say I have," Caleb lied smoothly. "We've been on the trail for days. Haven't seen much of anyone." Cooper didn't look convinced. "Mind if I check your wagon? Just routine, you understand." "I do mind, actually. We're law-abiding citizens, and unless you've got cause to detain us, we'll be on our way." Cooper's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "I could make it official. I am military police, after all." "Military police has jurisdiction over military personnel, not civilians," Ayanna said suddenly, her voice clear and strong. "Unless you have a warrant signed by a civilian magistrate, you have no authority to search our property." Cooper's eyes narrowed as he studied her more closely. "You know a lot about the law for a settler's wife." "My father believed in education," Ayanna replied coolly. "Now are we free to go, Corporal?" For a moment Caleb thought Cooper would push the issue. His hand tightened on his pistol grip, and Caleb shifted slightly, ready to grab his rifle if needed. But then Cooper seemed to think better of it. He was outnumbered and alone, and while he might suspect who Ayanna was, he couldn't prove it without searching the wagon. "For now," Cooper said, "but I'll be keeping an eye out. If you're harboring a fugitive, it'll go badly for you." "Good day, Corporal," Caleb said, snapping the reins. Ezra, happy to be moving again, plodded forward. Cooper had to move his horse aside to let them pass. They rode in tense silence for the next half hour, both of them watching their back trail for any sign of Cooper following. But the trail remained empty behind them. Still, Caleb didn't relax. Cooper had seen them, recognized Ayanna despite her disguise. It was only a matter of time before he reported back to Blackwood. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they came to a small creek where Caleb decided to stop for the night. They made camp in a dense copse of pine trees, well off the trail where the wagon wouldn't be visible to anyone passing by. Caleb built a small fire, barely enough to boil coffee and warm some of Martha's dried beef. As they ate, Ayanna stared into the flames, her expression troubled. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That every step forward brings us closer to Nashville, but also brings more enemies out of hiding. Cooper will tell Blackwood. Blackwood will send more men. How many can we fight before our luck runs out?" "We don't need luck. We need Judge Hawthorne." Caleb poured her more coffee. "Once we reach her, once she hears your story and sees the evidence, Blackwood's power starts to crumble. If we reach her, if we can find the documents, if Blackwood doesn't have her killed before she can rule." Ayanna set down her cup. "So many ifs, Caleb. Margaret used to say that worrying about tomorrow robs you of today." He immediately regretted mentioning his wife, worried it might create awkwardness between them. But Ayanna simply smiled. "She sounds like she was wise." She was. Too wise for a mountain man like me, truth be told. Sometimes I wondered what she saw in me. Maybe she saw what I see, a man who's stronger than he thinks, kinder than he believes, and brave enough to fight for what's right even when it's dangerous. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. Compliments had always made him uncomfortable. "I'm just doing what needs doing." That's what brave people always say. Ayanna shifted closer to the fire, and in the flickering light, Caleb saw how the flames painted gold across her copper skin, how her eyes reflected the dancing light like dark mirrors. "Can I ask you something?" "Course." "When this is over, when we've beaten Blackwood and saved my people's land, what will you do? Go back to your cabin and your solitary life?" It was a question Caleb had been avoiding thinking about. A week ago the answer would have been obvious. Yes, he'd returned to his mountain, his cabin, his carefully constructed isolation. But now, looking at Ayanna, thinking about the past few days of purpose and connection, and feeling truly alive for the first time since Margaret's death, he found he didn't know the answer anymore. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "When you do, I hope you'll consider that maybe being alone isn't the same as being at peace." She stood, moving to the wagon. "I'm going to try to sleep. We should leave before dawn." Caleb sat by the dying fire long after Ayanna had settled into the wagon bed. Her words echoed in his mind. Maybe being alone isn't the same as being at peace. 3 years he'd told himself that solitude was what he needed, what he deserved after failing to save Margaret. But had he been at peace, or had he just been hiding from the pain? He didn't have answers, but for the first time he was asking the questions. They broke camp before first light and pushed on toward Nashville. The trading route brought them down from the high country into rolling farmland dotted with small homesteads. Smoke rose from chimneys, and in the distance Caleb could see farmers already at work in their fields despite the early hour. Around mid-morning they crested a rise and saw Nashville spread before them in the valley below. It was larger than Caleb had expected, easily hundreds of buildings, with church steeples rising like fingers pointing toward heaven. The Cumberland River snaked through the city, its waters reflecting the morning sun like hammered silver. "I've never seen a city so large," Ayanna breathed. "It'll be crowded, easy to get lost in, but also easy for enemies to hide." Caleb studied the city, planning their approach. "We need to find Judge Hawthorne's office without drawing attention. Martha said it's near the courthouse on the main square." They descended into the city, and Caleb felt increasingly uncomfortable as buildings closed in around them. He was a man of open spaces and mountain vistas. These narrow streets and looming structures made him feel trapped. Ayanna, he noticed, seemed equally ill at ease, her eyes darting to every alley and doorway. Finding the courthouse proved easy enough. It was an imposing brick building with white columns, standing 3 stories tall and dominating the town square. Judge Hawthorne's office, according to a helpful clerk, was on the 2nd floor. Caleb left the wagon at a public stable, paying extra for the attendant to look after Ezra. Then he and Ayanna climbed the courthouse steps. Inside, the building was all dark wood and echoing hallways that smelled of old paper and floor wax. Their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the wooden floors. Judge Hawthorne's office door was marked with a brass plate bearing her name. Caleb knocked, and a woman's voice called, "Enter." The woman behind the desk was perhaps 62, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes like chips of blue ice. She wore a severe black dress that somehow managed to look both feminine and authoritative. When she looked up from the document she was reading, those ice-blue eyes fixed on them with an intensity that made Caleb feel like she could see straight through to his bones. "Judge Hawthorne," Caleb said, removing his hat. "My name is Caleb Thornwood. Sam Brennan sent us." The judge's expression softened slightly. "Sam, how is that old reprobate?" "Ornery as ever, ma'am." "Good. The world needs more ornery old men willing to stand up to corruption." Her eyes shifted to Ayanna. "And you would be the Apache woman half of Tennessee is searching for." Ayanna stepped forward, squaring her shoulders despite the pain it must have caused. "I am Ayanna, daughter of Chief Dakota of the Mescalero Apache. And I need your help, Your Honor." Judge Hawthorne gestured to the chairs facing her desk. "Sit, both of you, and tell me everything. Leave nothing out." For the next hour, Ayanna told her story while Judge Hawthorne listened without interruption. The judge's face remained impassive, but Caleb saw her hands clench when Ayanna described the ambush, saw the flash of anger in those blue eyes when Blackwood's name was mentioned. When Ayanna finished, Judge Hawthorne opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "Ezekiel Blackwood. I've been building a case against him for 2 years. That man is a cancer on this territory, corrupting everything he touches." She spread several documents across her desk. I have evidence of fraud, bribery, and intimidation, but nothing that's been strong enough to convict him. He always manages to stay just on the legal side of the line, or he intimidates witnesses into silence. The documents my uncle carried would prove his fraud, Ayanna said. The original land grants, the court ruling in our favor, everything needed to expose him. Then we need to retrieve them. Judge Hawthorne pulled out a map. Show me exactly where this ambush occurred. Ayanna studied the map, then pointed. Here, in the ravine where Copper Creek Road passes through the mountains. Judge Hawthorne frowned. That's 60 miles from here, and if Blackwood's men are watching the site, which they certainly are, attempting to retrieve those documents would be suicide. Then what do we do? Caleb asked. The judge sat back, steepling her fingers. We need military support, someone we can trust absolutely. She stood and moved to her office door, speaking to the clerk outside. Send for Lieutenant Ashford. Tell him it's urgent. 20 minutes later, a knock sounded on the door and a man in cavalry blues entered. He was perhaps 38, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen hard service. His uniform was worn but clean, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a professional soldier. Your Honor, he said, nodding to the judge. Then his eyes found Ayanna and widened slightly. Lieutenant Daniel Ashford, Judge Hawthorne said. Meet Ayanna and Caleb Thornwood. They're the reason I called you here. Ashford's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. That's the woman from the wanted posters. Yes, and every word on those posters is a lie, as you're about to learn. Judge Hawthorne gestured to a chair. Sit down, Lieutenant. I need your help with something that may cost you your career if things go badly. Ashford hesitated, then sat. I'm listening. Judge Hawthorne explained the situation while Ashford listened with growing anger. When she finished, he slammed his fist on the desk. I knew Blackwood was dirty. I've suspected Cooper was on his payroll for months, but I had no proof. Now you have a chance to get proof, Judge Hawthorne said. I need you to take a small unit of men you trust absolutely and escort these two back to the ambush site. Retrieve those documents. Without them, we can't touch Blackwood. It'll be dangerous, Ashford warned. If Blackwood has men watching that site, there will be a fight. I'm aware, which is why I'm only asking for volunteers and only men whose loyalty is beyond question. Ashford stood, moving to the window where he could look out over the city. For a long moment he was silent. Then he turned back. I have 4 men. Good soldiers, honest men who hate seeing corruption in their ranks. We can leave within the hour. Thank you, Lieutenant. Judge Hawthorne's expression was grave. If this goes wrong, I can't protect you. Blackwood has friends in high places. If this goes right, maybe we can start cleaning out those high places. Ashford looked at Caleb and Ayanna. Get your things. We ride hard and fast. With luck, we'll be there by tomorrow afternoon. They gathered their supplies and met Ashford and his 4 soldiers at the city's north gate. The soldiers were young but had the look of men who'd seen action. They eyed Ayanna curiously but said nothing as Ashford made introductions. This is Corporal Hayes and Privates Miller, Johnson, and Torres, Ashford said. They know what we're doing and why. They volunteered knowing the risks. Hayes, a stocky man with a thick black beard, nodded to Caleb. Served with the Cherokee Nation before joining the cavalry. Any friend of Sam Brennan's is a friend of mine. They rode out of Nashville as storm clouds gathered in the west. Ashford set a brutal pace, stopping only briefly to water the horses and grab quick meals of hardtack and dried beef. Ayanna bore the journey stoically, though Caleb could see the strain in her face. Her shoulder had to be screaming with pain, but she never complained. They made camp that night in a clearing beside a fast-running stream. While the soldiers set up pickets and tended to the horses, Caleb checked Ayanna's wound. The bandage was soaked through with seepage and needed changing. This is going to hurt, he warned as he peeled away the old cloth. Everything hurts, Ayanna replied. What's a little more? But when he cleaned the wound with whiskey, she bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. The injury was healing but slowly, and the constant riding was keeping it inflamed. Caleb applied fresh herbs and bound it tightly, then helped her to her bedroll near the fire. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "Every day with you has been hard," she said, but there was warmth in her voice. "And every day I've been grateful you're beside me." Before Caleb could respond, Lieutenant Ashford appeared. "Can I have a word?" he asked quietly. They moved away from the fire, and Ashford's expression turned serious. "I need to know something. What's between you and her?" Caleb bristled. "That's none of your business." "It is if it affects your judgment. Tomorrow we're riding into a potential ambush. I need everyone thinking clearly, not distracted by personal feelings." "My feelings won't affect my judgment." "I hope not. Because that woman deserves justice, and she won't get it if we're all dead." Ashford studied Caleb's face in the darkness. "For what it's worth, I think you're a good man doing a brave thing. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." He walked away before Caleb could respond, leaving Caleb to wrestle with the question. Was he doing this for justice? For Ayanna's people? Or was he doing it because somewhere along the way he'd started to care about her more than he'd intended? Maybe it was all three. Maybe that was okay. They broke camp before dawn and pushed on. By mid-afternoon they'd reached the ravine where the ambush had occurred. Ashford called a halt a half-mile away, surveying the area through a small telescope. "See anything?" Caleb asked. "Smoke. Looks like they've got a camp set up right at the ambush site." Ashford collapsed the telescope. "Smart. They're not hiding. They want us to know they're there." "How many?" "At least 8. Could be more hidden in the rocks." Ashford turned to his men. "Hayes, Miller, you circle around to the east ridge. Get in position to provide covering fire. Torres, Johnson, you're with me. We'll approach from the west and try to draw them out. Thornwood, you and the woman stay back until we've secured the area." "Like hell," Caleb said. "I'm going in with you." "You're not a soldier." "No, but I know these mountains better than anyone, and I'm a better shot than most." Caleb checked his rifle. "Besides, that site is right where I found Ayanna. I know every rock and tree." Ashford looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Fine, but you follow my orders. This is a military operation now." They left Ayanna with the horses, though she clearly wanted to come. "I can fight," she insisted. "I know you can," Caleb said gently. "But you're also injured and the person they most want to capture. You stay here, stay hidden, and if things go badly, you ride hard for Nashville and tell Judge Hawthorne everything." "If things go badly, I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you will, because your people need those documents more than they need you or me. Promise me, Ayanna." After a long moment she nodded. "I promise. But you'd better come back, Caleb Thornwood." "Plan to." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that somehow, in the space of a week, she'd become important to him in ways he didn't fully understand. But the words stuck in his throat, and the moment passed as Ashford waved them forward. They approached the ravine carefully, using every bit of available cover. As they drew closer, Caleb could see the camp Ashford had spotted. 8 men lounged around a fire, their horses picketed nearby. And in the center of the camp, looking completely at ease, sat Silas Crenshaw. Ashford positioned his men in a semicircle above the camp, giving them clear firing lanes but staying just out of easy pistol range. Then he stood and called down. "Silas Crenshaw, this is Lieutenant Daniel Ashford, United States Cavalry. You and your men are ordered to disperse immediately. This is federal land and you have no authority here." Crenshaw looked up, seemingly unsurprised. "Well now, Lieutenant. Didn't expect the cavalry. Thought maybe just that mountain man and his Apache whore." Caleb's finger tightened on his rifle trigger, but Ashford shot him a warning glance. "I won't ask again," Ashford called. "Leave now or face the consequences." "Consequences?" Crenshaw laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "You're outnumbered, Lieutenant. I've got 15 men in these rocks, all with rifles pointed at you right now. You really want to start a shooting war you can't win?" As if to prove his point, Men began appearing from the rocks and brush around the ravine. Crenshaw hadn't been lying. Ashford's small force was badly outnumbered. "Stand down," Ashford ordered his men. "Weapons ready, but don't fire unless fired upon." Crenshaw stood, his massive frame unfolding like a bear rising from sleep. "Now you're thinking smart, Lieutenant. Tell you what, you and your boys ride away, forget you saw anything here, and nobody gets hurt. We're just waiting for someone, and once they show up, we'll be gone." "You're waiting for Ayanna," Caleb called down. Crenshaw's eyes found him. "The mountain man. Figured you'd come back. Where is she? You leave her somewhere safe while you do the dangerous work? That's mighty thoughtful." "She's gone. I sent her to the federal marshal in Knoxville with a full report on Blackwood's activities." It was a calculated lie, meant to make Crenshaw think their quarry had escaped. But Crenshaw just smiled. "Now that's interesting, because my friend Cooper saw you both riding into Nashville yesterday. So unless she can be in two places at once, I'm thinking she's not far from here." He raised his voice. "You hear that, Apache girl? All these men are going to die because of you. Come on out, and maybe I'll let them live." Silence answered him. Caleb's heart pounded. Had Ayanna heard? Would she give herself up to save them? He prayed she'd keep her promise, stay hidden no matter what. Then everything went to hell. One of Crenshaw's men, younger and more nervous than the others, spotted movement in the rocks where Corporal Hayes was positioned. The young fool fired without orders, and Hayes returned fire instinctively. In seconds, the ravine erupted in gunfire. Caleb threw himself behind a boulder as bullets whined off the rocks around him. He brought his rifle up and fired at one of Crenshaw's men who was drawing a bead on Lieutenant Ashford. The man spun and fell, clutching his chest. Ashford's soldiers returned fire with disciplined volleys, making every shot count, but they were still outnumbered nearly 3-1. Caleb worked his rifle rapidly, firing, reloading, firing again. He'd grown up hunting in these mountains. He knew how to make difficult shots, and he didn't waste ammunition. 3 more of Crenshaw's men went down before the rest realized they were facing more skilled opposition than expected. They began taking cover, making themselves harder targets. The firefight settled into an ugly stalemate. Neither side could advance without exposing themselves to devastating fire. Crenshaw's men had numbers. Ashford's men had training and discipline. They were locked in a deadly dance where one mistake by either side could tip the balance. Then Caleb heard the sound that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats, coming fast from behind their position. He risked a glance back and saw Silas Crenshaw himself, along with 4 men, circling around to flank them. Crenshaw must have sent them around while the shooting started. "Ashford!" Caleb shouted. "Behind us!" But it was too late. Crenshaw and his men burst from the trees, guns blazing. Private Torres went down with a scream, clutching his leg. Lieutenant Ashford took a bullet in the shoulder but kept firing. They were caught between 2 forces now, and their situation had gone from bad to desperate. Caleb swung his rifle around and fired at Crenshaw, but the big man was fast despite his size. The bullet missed by inches. Crenshaw charged forward, and suddenly they were too close for rifles. Caleb dropped his weapon and went for his knife, but Crenshaw was on him before he could draw it. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Crenshaw's massive fists hammering at Caleb's head and ribs. Caleb managed to get his forearm up to block the worst of it, then drove his knee up into Crenshaw's gut. The big man grunted but didn't slow. His hands found Caleb's throat and squeezed. Caleb's vision began to narrow, black spots dancing at the edges. He clawed at Crenshaw's hands, but it was like trying to break iron bars. This was it. After everything, he was going to die in the dirt like a dog, while Ayanna's people lost their last chance at justice. Then a gunshot cracked and Crenshaw jerked, his grip loosening. Another shot, and Crenshaw toppled sideways, blood spreading across his shoulder. Caleb gasped for air, his vision clearing. Standing 20 feet away, a smoking pistol in her hand, was Ayanna. She'd broken her promise. She'd come to save him. "No!" Caleb croaked, his voice raw from Crenshaw's chokehold. "Run!" But Ayanna didn't run. She walked forward calmly, the pistol never wavering as she approached Crenshaw where he lay wounded. The big man looked up at her with hate in his eyes. "You little Apache bitch," he snarled. "You think shooting me changes anything? Blackwood's got more men. He's got money. He's got power. You've already lost." Ayanna's expression was cold as winter's stone. "Blackwood has nothing. His power was built on lies, and lies crumble when exposed to truth." She looked past him to where his men were still firing at Ashford's soldiers. "Tell your men to stand down, now, or the next bullet goes between your eyes." Crenshaw studied her face and must have seen she meant it. "Stand down," he bellowed. "All of you, stand down." The shooting stopped gradually, uncertainty rippling through Crenshaw's men. They'd just watched their leader get shot by a woman half his size. Ashford seized the moment. "Weapons down," he ordered. "All of you, on the ground, now." Slowly, reluctantly, Crenshaw's men complied. In the space of heartbeats, the situation had reversed. Ashford's soldiers moved in, collecting weapons and binding prisoners, while Corporal Hayes tended to the wounded. Caleb struggled to his feet, his throat on fire and his ribs screaming. Ayanna was there instantly, supporting him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know I promised, but I couldn't let you die. You saved my life. Now we're even." She smiled, but tears streaked her face. "Don't ever scare me like that again." Lieutenant Ashford approached, blood seeping through his uniform jacket from his shoulder wound, but his expression grimly satisfied. "Miss Ayanna, that was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever seen. I can't decide which." "Does it matter?" she replied. "We're alive, and they're not." While Ashford's men secured the prisoners, Caleb and Ayanna searched the ravine for her uncle's body. They found it beneath an overhang of rock, partially covered with brush that Cale must have pulled over himself in his dying moments. He'd been dead for over a week, and the sight was not pleasant, but Ayanna knelt beside him with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Uncle," she whispered in Apache. "I'm so sorry I left you." "He saved you," Caleb said gently. "That's what he wanted." Ayanna searched her uncle's body with trembling hands and finally found what they'd come for. A leather document case carefully wrapped in oilcloth and hidden inside Cale's shirt. She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were the court documents, the land grants, the testimonies, everything needed to prove Blackwood's fraud, all of it intact and legally binding. "We did it," she breathed. "We actually did it." They buried Cale properly, right there in the ravine. Ashford's men helped dig the grave and stood respectfully as Ayanna sang an Apache death song. They placed stones over the grave and marked it with a cross made from mountain pine. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had. As they prepared to leave, Lieutenant Ashford approached with Silas Crenshaw, his hands bound and his shoulder roughly bandaged. "He wants to talk to you," Ashford said to Ayanna. Ayanna regarded Crenshaw coldly. "I have nothing to say to you." "Maybe not, but I've got something to say to you." Crenshaw's face was gray with pain and perhaps with fear. "Blackwood didn't just hire me to kill you. He's got men everywhere, in the courts, in the army, even in the governor's office. You think getting those papers to a judge is going to stop him?" "Judge Hawthorne can't be bought," Ayanna said. "Maybe not, but she can be killed. Blackwood's already sent word. If you make it back to Nashville with those documents, she dies. Her clerk dies. Anyone who helps you dies." Crenshaw actually looked regretful. "I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a murderer of women and old men. That's why I'm telling you. Blackwood's gone too far this time. He's going to burn down half of Tennessee to keep his secrets." Lieutenant Ashford pulled Crenshaw away, but the damage was done. Judge Hawthorne was in danger. Anyone who helped them was in danger. Blackwood was striking out desperately, and desperate men were capable of anything. "We need to get back to Nashville," Caleb said. "Fast." They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard. By dawn, they could see Nashville's buildings on the horizon. But as they approached the city, they saw smoke rising from several locations. Thick, black smoke, that spoke of major fires. "Oh no," Ashford breathed. "He's done it. He's burning the city." They galloped through the streets, dodging panicked citizens fleeing the fires. 3 buildings were burning, including one terrifyingly close to the courthouse. Fire brigades worked frantically to contain the blazes, but it was chaos. Ashford led them straight to Judge Hawthorne's office. They burst through the door to find the judge calmly packing documents into a case while her elderly clerk helped her. "Your Honor," Ashford gasped, "you need to evacuate. Blackwood's burning the city." "I'm aware, Lieutenant. I've been watching the fires from my window." Judge Hawthorne's face was like carved granite. "But I'm not running. Not from fires, and certainly not from Ezekiel Blackwood." "We have the documents," Ayanna said, holding up the case. "Everything we need to convict him." Judge Hawthorne's eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction. "Then Mr. Blackwood has made his final mistake. By trying to intimidate the court with violence, he's committed a federal crime. No amount of bribery will save him now." She moved to her desk and pulled out a pen and paper. "Lieutenant Ashford, I'm issuing you a warrant for Ezekiel Blackwood's immediate arrest. Bring him to this courthouse. Tomorrow morning we hold a preliminary hearing. I want every newspaper in Tennessee present. I want the whole territory to see justice done." As Ashford left with his men to arrest Blackwood, Judge Hawthorne turned to Caleb and Ayanna. "You two look like death warmed over. There are rooms upstairs where court witnesses sometimes stay. Go, rest, clean up. Tomorrow will be a long day." But Ayanna shook her head. "I need to be there when they arrest him. I need to see his face when he realizes he's lost." "Ayanna," Caleb said gently, "you're exhausted. Let Ashford handle it." "No." Her voice was firm. "I've run from this man for weeks. I've watched my uncle die because of him. I've been shot, hunted, and nearly killed 6 times. I will not hide while he's arrested. I will be there." Judge Hawthorne studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But Caleb goes with you, and you both come straight back here after. Understood?" They found Blackwood at his office, a lavish building on the edge of the business district. He was preparing to leave, his desk cleared and bags packed. He looked up when Ashford and his soldiers entered, and for just a moment, fear flashed across his face. Then his expression smoothed into calculated charm. "Lieutenant Ashford," he said smoothly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Ashford held up the warrant. "Ezekiel Blackwood, I'm arresting you for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and corruption of federal officials. You will come with us peacefully or in chains. Your choice." Blackwood's mask slipped. "This is absurd. I'm a respected businessman. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Ashford said. "I suggest you exercise it." As soldiers moved to restrain him, Blackwood's eyes found Ayanna standing in the doorway. Hate twisted his features. "You. This is all because of you. One Apache girl destroyed everything I built." Ayanna stepped forward, her chin high. "No, you destroyed it yourself. With your greed, your lies, your complete disregard for human life. I simply made sure the truth came to light." "Truth?" Blackwood laughed bitterly. "What do you know about truth? You're just a savage from the desert who doesn't understand how the real world works." "I understand more than you think." Ayanna's voice was steady and strong. "I understand that power built on lies will always crumble. I understand that justice, though sometimes slow, is inevitable. And I understand that you, Ezekiel Blackwood, will spend the rest of your life paying for your crimes." Blackwood tried to lunge at her, but soldiers held him back. As they dragged him from the office, he screamed threats and curses, but they echoed emptily off the walls. Outside, a crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Word spread quickly through Nashville that the great Ezekiel Blackwood had been arrested. Some people cheered, others looked stunned. A few seemed frightened, perhaps realizing that if Blackwood could fall, no one's corruption was safe. They escorted Blackwood to the courthouse jail, where he'd be held until the hearing. As they walked through the streets, Caleb stayed close to Ayanna. watching for any attempt by Blackwood's remaining supporters to free him or harm her. But no attack came. Perhaps Blackwood's web of corruption wasn't as strong as everyone had thought. Perhaps people were simply tired of living under his shadow. At the courthouse, Judge Hawthorne was waiting. She watched impassively as Blackwood was led past her into the holding cells. Then she turned to Ayanna and Caleb. "It's over," she said simply. "Tomorrow we formalize it in court, but it's over. You've won." Ayanna swayed suddenly, and Caleb caught her before she fell. The adrenaline that had kept her going finally gave out, and exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Caleb lifted her easily and carried her upstairs to the witness rooms, Judge Hawthorne leading the way. They laid her on a bed, and the judge helped remove her boots while Caleb checked her shoulder wound. It was inflamed and angry-looking, pushed too hard for too long, but it would heal now. She'd have time to rest, time to recover. "She's stronger than anyone I've ever met," Judge Hawthorne said quietly. "She's been through hell, and she never once gave up." "No," Caleb agreed. "She never did. And neither did you." The judge fixed him with that penetrating blue gaze. "Sam told me about you, about Margaret, about how you buried yourself in the mountains for 3 years. But you came back. You fought when you could have run. That takes courage." "Or foolishness," Caleb said. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Judge Hawthorne stood. "Get some rest yourself. Tomorrow's hearing will be quick, but it needs to be done properly. The newspapers will have their story. The people will have their justice. And Miss Ayanna will have her victory." That night, Caleb sat in a chair beside Ayanna's bed, watching her sleep. Her face, finally relaxed in true rest, looked younger and somehow even more beautiful. He found himself thinking about what came next. The hearing would finalize Blackwood's downfall. Ayanna's people would get their land back. Justice would be served. And then what? She'd return to New Mexico, to her father and brother and people. Back to the desert she called home. And he'd go back to his mountain cabin, his solitary existence. They'd go back to their separate worlds, and this brief, intense chapter of their lives would close. The thought left him hollow inside. Somewhere during their journey, something had changed. She wasn't just someone he'd rescued anymore. She'd become someone he cared about, someone whose laughter made him smile, someone whose courage inspired him, someone who made him feel alive in ways he'd thought he'd never feel again after Margaret. But what could he offer her? He was a mountain man with no education, no prospects, no future beyond survival in the wilderness. She was the daughter of a chief, a woman who'd fought for her people and won. She belonged to something greater than one man's lonely cabin. As dawn broke over Nashville, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Caleb made a decision. He'd see this through. He'd stand beside Ayanna at the hearing. He'd make sure Blackwood faced justice. And then he'd let her go, because that was what she deserved. She deserved better than a broken man still haunted by his past, even if letting her go broke something inside him that might never heal again. The courthouse was packed to overflowing by 8 o'clock the next morning. Word had spread through Nashville like wildfire that Ezekiel Blackwood, the most powerful man in the territory, would face justice for his crimes. Farmers had ridden in from miles away. Shopkeepers closed their stores. Even the saloons stood empty as their patrons crowded into the courthouse square, those who couldn't fit inside pressing against the windows to catch any glimpse of the proceedings. Caleb stood beside Ayanna in the witness room, helping her adjust the sling that supported her injured shoulder. She'd insisted on wearing traditional Apache dress for the hearing, the buckskin carefully cleaned and mended, the silver pendant of her people gleaming at her throat. If Blackwood had tried to make her hide who she was, she would face him as exactly what she was, the daughter of Chief Dakota, proud and unbroken. "You ready for this?" Caleb asked. Ayanna met his eyes. "I've been ready since the moment they killed Uncle Kalo. This is what he died for, what we nearly died for." She paused, her expression softening. What you risked everything for." Before Caleb could respond, Judge Hawthorne appeared in the doorway. She wore her judicial robes, black and severe, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like the very embodiment of justice, stern and unyielding. "It's time," she said simply. They followed her into the courtroom, and Caleb felt every eye in the building turn to watch them. The attention made his skin crawl, but Ayanna walked with her head high, her bearing regal despite her injuries. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some admiring, some hostile, all fascinated by the Apache woman who'd brought down a titan. Blackwood sat at the defendant's table, flanked by his lawyer, Frederick Ashton, a distinguished man with silver hair and an expensive suit. Blackwood himself looked different than he had the day before. The arrogance was gone, replaced by barely contained rage. His eyes tracked Ayanna as she took her seat at the prosecution table, and the hatred in that gaze made Caleb's hand move instinctively toward his knife. Judge Hawthorne took her place at the bench and struck her gavel once, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent courtroom. "This court is now in session. We are here for a preliminary hearing in the matter of the United States versus Ezekiel Blackwood. Mr. Ashton, how does your client plead?" Ashton stood smoothly. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. Furthermore, we move to dismiss all charges on the grounds of insufficient evidence and improper arrest." "Motion denied," Judge Hawthorne said without hesitation. "The evidence is substantial, and the arrest was conducted by a commissioned officer with a valid warrant. Sit down, Mr. Ashton." The lawyer sat, but not before shooting Blackwood a worried glance. That was when Caleb knew they'd won. Ashton, for all his reputation, knew his client was guilty. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about damage control. "The prosecution may present its case," Judge Hawthorne said. Lieutenant Ashford, his shoulder bandaged but his uniform immaculate, stood and laid out the charges methodically. Fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of federal officials, arson. Each charge was documented with evidence: the forged land grants, testimony from Silas Crenshaw and Wade Cooper, who'd both agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences, financial records showing payments to corrupt officials, and eyewitness accounts of the fires Blackwood had ordered set. Then Ayanna took the stand, and the courtroom fell absolutely silent. She told her story in a clear, steady voice. The journey from New Mexico, her father's faith in American justice, the court victory in Washington, the ambush that killed her uncle and the escort, her rescue by Caleb, the pursuit through the mountains. Every detail was laid bare for all to hear. When she finished, Judge Hawthorne looked directly at Blackwood. "Does the defendant wish to cross-examine?" Ashton started to rise, but Blackwood grabbed his arm and yanked him back down. Then, ignoring his lawyer's frantic whispers, Blackwood stood. "I have something to say," he announced. "Mr. Blackwood, I strongly advise against this," Ashton hissed. "I don't care about your advice anymore." Blackwood turned to face the packed courtroom. "You all sit here judging me, but what do you know about building something from nothing? I came to this territory with empty pockets and created an empire through hard work and intelligence." "Through fraud and murder," Judge Hawthorne corrected coldly. "Through necessity." Blackwood's voice rose. "That Apache land was wasted on savages who didn't know what to do with it. I could have made something of it, brought civilization, created jobs, built towns. But no, we have to protect the rights of people who live in mud huts and worship the sun." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Even those who'd supported Blackwood looked uncomfortable now. He'd gone too far, said too much. Ayanna stood slowly, and the courtroom quieted again, everyone waiting to hear how she'd respond to such venom. She looked at Blackwood with something that might have been pity. "You speak of civilization, Mr. Blackwood, but you don't understand what the word means. My people have lived on that land for generations. We know every stream, every plant, every animal. We take only what we need and give thanks for what we're given. We have laws, traditions, honor." Her voice strengthened. "You call us savages, but which of us has killed for gold? Which of us has lied to courts and bribed officials? Which of us has set fires in a city full of innocent people?" "Your people are finished," Blackwood snarled. "Even if I lose here today, there will be others like me. The Apache will be pushed out, driven away, destroyed. It's inevitable." "Perhaps," Ayanna said quietly. "But if that day comes, we will face it with our honor intact. Can you say the same, Mr. Blackwood? When you're in prison, when your empire is dust, when history writes your name as a cautionary tale, will you be able to say you lived with honor?" Blackwood had no answer. He sat down heavily, and Caleb saw all the fight go out of him. He'd gambled everything and lost. Now there was nothing left but the reckoning. Judge Hawthorne's verdict was swift and absolute. Having reviewed the evidence and heard testimony, this court finds sufficient cause to bind Ezekiel Blackwood over for trial on all charges. Bail is denied given the severity of the crimes and the defendant's demonstrated willingness to use violence and intimidation. The defendant will remain in custody until trial. She struck her gavel. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate return of all Apache lands fraudulently obtained by the defendant, along with full restitution for damages." This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in noise. Some people cheered, others argued. Reporters rushed for the doors, eager to file their stories. In the chaos, Caleb kept close to Ayanna, shielding her from the press of bodies. They made their way out through a side exit where Judge Hawthorne was waiting with Lieutenant Ashford. "Well done," the judge said to Ayanna. "Your testimony was perfect, calm, factual, and devastating." "I only told the truth," Ayanna replied. "The truth is often the most powerful weapon." Judge Hawthorne handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a letter to your father, officially notifying him that your tribal lands have been restored. I've also included documentation that should prevent anyone from attempting Blackwood's scheme again. Take it home. Take your victory home." Ayanna accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. Thank Lieutenant Ashford and Mr. Thornwood. They're the ones who risked their lives." Judge Hawthorne paused. "What will you do now?" "Return to New Mexico," Ayanna said, but her eyes slid to Caleb as she spoke. "My people need to know what happened. They need to see these documents." "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow, I suppose. There's nothing keeping me here." Caleb felt something twist in his chest at those words. Nothing keeping her here. Of course not. Why would there be? They spent the rest of that day in a blur of activity. Ayanna wrote letters to her father, to her brother, to the tribal council. Caleb arranged for horses and supplies for her journey. They worked side by side, but somehow the easy companionship they'd shared on the trail was gone, replaced by an awkward formality that neither of them could quite bridge. As evening fell, they found themselves on the courthouse steps, watching the sun set over Nashville. The city was already recovering from the fires, people working together to rebuild what Blackwood had tried to destroy. There was a sense of hope in the air, of new beginnings. "Beautiful sunset," Ayanna said finally, breaking the long silence between them. "Yeah," Caleb agreed, though he was barely looking at the sky. "Caleb, I need to ask you something." She turned to face him. "Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything to help me? You could have left me in that ravine. You could have turned back at any point. But you didn't. Why?" It was the question he'd been dreading, because he didn't have a good answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but saying it out loud would make it real, and making it real would make losing her that much harder. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "That's all? Just duty?" "No." The word came out harsher than he intended. "Not just duty, because somewhere along the way, I started to care about what happened to you, because you reminded me that there are things worth fighting for, because you made me feel alive again for the first time in 3 years. He stopped, aware that he'd said too much, revealed too much. Ayana's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm going to miss you, Caleb Thornwood. I'll miss you too." They stood there on the steps as night fell around them, the space between them feeling like an unbridgeable chasm, even though they stood close enough to touch. Finally, Ayana spoke again. "Come with me." Caleb's heart stuttered. "What?" "Come with me to New Mexico. My father would welcome you. My people would honor you as a hero. You could start a new life there, away from your lonely cabin and all those memories that haunt you." For a moment, Caleb let himself imagine it, riding across the desert with Ayana, meeting her family, building a life in a place where no one knew about Margaret, where he wouldn't be the hermit of Smoky Mountain, where he could simply be Caleb. But then reality crashed back in. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm not Apache. I'd be an outsider, a stranger in your land just like you'd be a stranger in mine, and because you deserve better than a mountain man who barely speaks and doesn't know how to live among people anymore." "I don't want better. I want you." Ayana grabbed his hand. "Caleb, I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to take a chance on something new. On us." "There is no us. There can't be. You're a chief's daughter going home to your people. I'm nobody going back to his cabin. We had a few weeks together when we both needed someone. But that doesn't make a life." Ayana pulled her hand back as if he'd struck her. "Is that really what you think? That we were just convenient for each other?" "No, I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" Her voice shook with anger and hurt. "Tell me, Caleb, because right now I'm trying to understand how the man who fought off bounty hunters and faced down Blackwoods men is too afraid to take a chance on being happy." The accusation stung because it was true. He was afraid, terrified actually, of caring that much again, of losing someone else, of failing to protect someone he loved. Because he did love her, he realized. Somewhere between that first night in his cabin and this moment on the courthouse steps, he'd fallen completely and hopelessly in love with Ayana. And that's exactly why he had to let her go. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but my answer is no. You should go home to your people. They need you more than I do." Ayana stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something he couldn't give her. Then she turned and walked back into the courthouse without another word, leaving Caleb alone on the steps with his cowardice and his breaking heart. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he walked the streets of Nashville until his feet ached, wrestling with his decision. Every part of him screamed to go after her, to tell her he'd made a mistake, to beg her to give him another chance. But fear held him paralyzed. Fear of loss, fear of inadequacy, fear of tarnishing the memory of what they'd had with the reality of what they couldn't sustain. By the time dawn broke, Caleb had made his decision. He'd leave Nashville that morning before Ayana woke. He'd ride back to his mountain, to his cabin, to the life he knew. It would hurt less if he didn't have to say goodbye. He was saddling Patience outside the stable when Judge Hawthorne found him. "Running away?" she asked, her tone conversational but her eyes sharp as flint. "Going home," Caleb corrected. "Without saying goodbye to the woman who loves you?" Caleb's hands stilled on the saddle straps. "She doesn't love me. She's grateful, that's all. I'm 62 years old, Mr. Thornwood. I've presided over more than 100 divorces and heard every possible excuse for why love doesn't work. So believe me when I say I know love when I see it." Judge Hawthorne stepped closer. "That young woman loves you, and unless I'm very much mistaken, you love her too. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It's the only thing that matters." The judge's voice softened. "I understand fear, Caleb. After my husband died, I almost let fear prevent me from ever loving again. But then I realized something. Fear of loss is just another way of giving death power over the living. Your Margaret wouldn't want that for you." "You didn't know Margaret." "No, but I know grief. And I know that the best way to honor someone we've lost is to keep living fully, to keep opening our hearts, to keep taking chances on joy." She paused. "Ayanna told me about Margaret's ring, the one you wore around your neck until a few days ago. She said you finally took it off. Why?" Caleb reached up to his bare throat, remembering the weight of that ring, the constant reminder of what he'd lost. "Because I realized I was using it as armor. As long as I wore it, I didn't have to risk feeling anything again. And now? Now I'm more afraid than ever. Because I do feel something. Too much. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to go through losing someone again." Judge Hawthorne smiled sadly. "No one is strong enough for that, my dear boy. But here's the secret. You don't have to be. You just have to be brave enough to love anyway, knowing that nothing lasts forever, but that doesn't make it any less precious." She left him there with those words echoing in his head. Caleb stood beside Patience for a long time, his hand on her flank, his mind churning. Finally, he made a decision. Not the safe decision, not the easy one, but the right one. He unsaddled Patience and went back inside the courthouse. Ayanna was in the witness room, packing her few belongings. She looked up when he entered, and her expression shuddered immediately, walls going up to protect her from further hurt. "I thought you'd left already," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I tried to. Got as far as saddling my horse before Judge Hawthorne talked some sense into me." Caleb closed the door behind him. "Can we talk?" "I think we said everything last night." "No. Last night I was an idiot and a coward. I'd like a chance to be less of both if you'll let me." Ayanna set down the shirt she'd been folding. "I'm listening." Caleb took a deep breath. 3 years ago I lost Margaret to fever. I couldn't save her. Couldn't do anything but watch her slip away. After she died, I told myself I'd never let anyone that close again, never risk that kind of pain again. So I hid in my cabin and told myself I was fine alone. "You weren't fine," Ayanna said quietly. "No, I was dying, just more slowly than Margaret had. And then I found you in that ravine, and everything changed. You changed me, made me remember what it felt like to care about something beyond simple survival, made me remember what it felt like to hope." He moved closer, and she didn't retreat. "Last night, when you asked me to come with you to New Mexico, I said no because I was afraid of loving you and losing you, afraid of not being enough for you, afraid of every damn thing except the one thing I should have been afraid of, letting you walk away." "Caleb," Ayanna's voice was barely a whisper. "I love you, Ayanna. I think I started loving you the moment you pulled that knife on me in the forest. And I don't have much to offer. No education, no prospects, just a cabin in the mountains, and hands that know how to build things and hunt things, but not much else. But if you'll have me, I'll go with you to New Mexico. I'll meet your father and your brother and try to learn your ways. And if it doesn't work, if your people don't want me there, or if I can't adapt, then we'll figure out something else. Together." Tears spilled down Ayanna's cheeks. "You mean it? You'll come?" "I mean it. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of being alone. And I'm tired of pretending I don't love you when it's the only thing I'm certain of anymore." Ayanna crossed the space between them and threw her arms around him, mindless of her injured shoulder. Caleb held her carefully, aware of her healing wound, but his heart soared. She was in his arms, and she was crying, and everything felt right in a way it hadn't since Margaret died. "I love you too," she said against his chest. "I've loved you since you gave me your coat in the rain, since you changed my bandages with such gentle hands, since you stood between me and Silas Crenshaw knowing you might die. I love you, Caleb Thornwood, and I don't care if you don't speak Apache or know our customs. My father will teach you. My people will welcome you, because anyone brave enough to save a chief's daughter and take on Ezekiel Blackwood is someone the Apache will honor." They stood there holding each other while morning light streamed through the window, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. Peace. Not the empty peace of isolation, but the full, rich peace of connection, of purpose, of love. A knock at the door interrupted them. Judge Hawthorne entered, took one look at them standing together, and smiled. "I take it you've reconsidered your travel plans, Mr. Thornwood?" "Yes, ma'am. Heading to New Mexico." "Excellent. Then you'll want to take this." She handed him an envelope. "It's a letter of introduction to Chief Dakota. I've explained the role you played in returning his daughter safely and securing justice for his people. I believe you'll find a warm welcome waiting." "Thank you," Caleb said, genuinely moved. "For everything, for believing in us, for standing up to Blackwood. I only did my job. You two are the ones who did the hard work." Judge Hawthorne paused at the door. "One more thing. Blackwood's trial is scheduled for 3 months from now. I may need both of you to testify. Can you return?" "We'll be here," Ayanna promised. They spent the next day preparing for the journey. Lieutenant Ashford provided them with horses, supplies, and a military escort for the first 100 miles. Martha Henshaw, when she heard they were leaving, sent a wagon full of provisions with a note that said simply, "For the road. Come back and visit us sometime." Even old Sam Brennan made the trip to Nashville to see them off. He took one look at Caleb and Ayanna standing together and laughed. "About damn time you figured it out, boy. I was beginning to think you'd lost your mind completely." "Maybe I did," Caleb admitted, "but I found it again." "You found more than that." Sam turned to Ayanna. "You take care of him, you hear? He's stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery, but his heart's good." "I know," Ayanna said, smiling. "I'll take care of him." Sam pulled something from his pocket and pressed it into Caleb's hand. It was a small carving of a bear made from mountain cedar and worn smooth with age. "Cherokee symbol of strength and new beginnings. My father made it for me 50 years ago. Now I'm giving it to you, for your new beginning." Caleb's throat tightened. "Sam, I can't take this." "Yes, you can. Consider it a wedding present." "We're not married." "Yet," Sam said with a knowing grin. "But you will be. I may be old, but I'm not blind." They left Nashville on a bright morning in late spring, riding west and south toward the territories. The journey would take weeks, crossing Tennessee into Arkansas, then west through Indian Territory and finally into New Mexico. It was a long road, but they rode it together, and that made all the difference. At night, they made camp under stars that seemed impossibly vast after weeks in the city. Ayanna taught Caleb words in Apache, laughing at his pronunciation. Caleb taught her mountain skills she didn't know, showing her how to find water by watching where birds flew at dusk, how to predict weather by the behavior of insects. They talked about everything and nothing, about Margaret and how much she would have liked Ayanna, about Ayanna's mother, who died when she was young, and how much she wished her mother could meet Caleb, about the future they were building together, one careful brick at a time. 3 weeks into their journey, as they crossed into Indian Territory, Ayanna woke Caleb in the middle of the night. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the sky. The aurora borealis danced overhead, ribbons of green and blue light shimmering across the stars. Caleb had heard of the northern lights but never seen them this far south. It seemed like a blessing, a sign that they were on the right path. "Make a wish," Ayanna said. "I don't need to. Everything I could wish for is right here." She looked at him, the aurora painting her face in shades of emerald and sapphire. "Caleb Thornwood, are you getting romantic on me?" "Maybe," he admitted. "Is that okay?" Instead of answering, she kissed him. It was their first real kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should probably talk about this," Ayanna said. "About us. About what happens when we reach my people. What do you want to happen?" "I want to marry you, by Apache custom and by whatever custom you prefer. I want you to meet my father as my chosen husband, not just as the man who saved me." She paused. "But I understand if you're not ready, if you need more time to be sure." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out Margaret's ring. He'd kept it even after taking it off, unable to completely let go. Now he held it up in the aurora's light. This was Margaret's wedding ring. I wore it for 3 years, thinking it was all I had left of her. But I was wrong. What I have left of her is the memory of what it felt like to love and be loved. She taught me how to open my heart, and now you've taught me it's okay to open it again." He tucked the ring back into his pocket. "I'm going to bury this ring under a tree when we reach your homeland. Not to forget Margaret, but to let her rest. To acknowledge that she had her time, and now it's your time. Our time." He took Ayanna's hands. "So yes, I want to marry you. By Apache custom and mountain custom and any other custom you want. I want to spend whatever time we have together, building a life and a home and maybe someday a family." Ayanna was crying again, but this time they were tears of joy. "You're going to make me cry all the time, aren't you?" "Probably. I've got 3 years of emotions backed up. Fair warning." They were married 6 weeks later, on a summer day so perfect it seemed designed by heaven itself. They'd reached the Apache lands 3 days earlier, and Ayanna's father, Chief Dakota, had welcomed Caleb with open arms. The chief was a man of perhaps 55, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He'd listened to Caleb's story, read Judge Hawthorne's letter, and then embraced him as a son. "You saved my daughter's life and restored my people's land," Dakota said. "You will always have a place here." The wedding was held at sunrise, combining Apache traditions with mountain customs Sam Brennan had taught Caleb. They stood facing east, toward the rising sun, while an elder named Red Sky Walker performed the Apache ceremony. He bound their wrists with a cord made of soft leather and blessed them in the ancient tongue. Then Caleb spoke his vows in English, his voice carrying across the assembled tribe. "I promise to stand beside you in all things, to honor your people as my people, to learn your ways and teach you mine, to love you through whatever comes, good or bad, until my last breath leaves my body." Ayanna spoke her vows in Apache first, then translated for him. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys, to build a home with you wherever we may wander, to love you as deeply as the desert canyon and as endlessly as the mountain sky." Red Sky Walker untied the cord and announced them married. The tribe erupted in celebration, drums beating, voices raised in songs of joy. Caleb found himself swept up in it, dancing with Ayanna, with her younger brother Dakota Jr., who was delighted to have a new brother-in-law, with elders and children and everyone who wanted to celebrate this union. Later, as the celebration continued into the night, Chief Dakota pulled Caleb aside. "Walk with me," he said. They walked to the edge of the village, where they could see the desert stretching away in all directions, silver in the moonlight. Dakota was quiet for a long time, then finally spoke. "When Ayanna left for Washington, I was afraid I'd never see her again. Blackwood's power was vast, and my daughter is brave but not invincible. I prayed to the spirits to protect her." "She protected herself mostly," Caleb said. "I just helped." "You did more than help. You gave her something to believe in when everything looked hopeless. You stood with her when you could have walked away. You loved her when she needed it most." Dakota placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "In Apache culture, we have a concept called Shaye, which means my son. From this day forward, that is what you are to me. My son, part of my family, part of my tribe, part of my heart." Caleb felt his throat close with emotion. After 3 years of isolation, of being cut off from family and community, he was being welcomed into both. "Thank you," he managed. "I'll try to be worthy of that honor." "You already are." Dakota smiled. "Now go back to your wife. It's your wedding night. You shouldn't be out here with an old man talking philosophy." Caleb returned to find Ayanna waiting for him outside a newly constructed dwelling, smaller than the others but built specifically for them. "My people made us a home," she said. "Our first home together." Inside, the dwelling was simple but comfortable. Woven blankets covered a bed of soft furs. A small fire burned in the center pit, its smoke rising through the opening in the roof to the stars beyond. Someone had left food and water, ensuring they'd have everything they needed for their first night as husband and wife. Ayanna turned to him, suddenly shy. "I've imagined this moment for weeks, but now that it's here, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Caleb drew her close, mindful of her shoulder, which had finally healed completely. "We have the rest of our lives for words." They made love slowly, tenderly, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered endearments. Afterward, they lay tangled together while the fire burned low and the night wind sang softly outside. "Are you happy?" Ayanna asked. Caleb thought about it, really thought about it, examining his heart for the first time in years, without fear or grief clouding his vision. "Yes," he said, surprised by how true it was. "I'm happy. For the first time since Margaret died, I'm truly, completely happy." "Good." Ayanna snuggled closer. "Because you're stuck with me now. No running back to your mountain." "I don't want my mountain. I want this. You, your people, this life we're building. That's my home now." The seasons turned, and life settled into a new rhythm. Caleb learned Apache ways, how to read the desert like he'd once read the mountains, how to find water in seemingly barren places, how to track game across sand and stone. He learned the language, slowly and with much patience, from Ayanna and her family. He learned the stories, the songs, the traditions that made the Apache people who they were. In return, he taught what he knew: mountain survival skills, how to cure leather and tan hides, how to build structures that could withstand harsh winters. The tribe welcomed his knowledge, incorporating it into their own practices. 6 months after their wedding, in the dead of winter, Caleb received word that Blackwood's trial was scheduled to begin. He and Ayanna made the long journey back to Nashville, this time with an honor guard of Apache warriors who insisted on accompanying them. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Blackwood's lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witness after witness testified to his crimes. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Hawthorne sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. "You corrupted officials, destroyed lives, and very nearly started a war between settlers and the Apache Nation," she said from the bench. "You will spend what remains of your life contemplating the consequences of your greed." As guards led Blackwood away in chains, he looked at Ayanna one last time. The hatred was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that might have been regret. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "That was my fatal mistake." "No," Ayanna replied. "Your fatal mistake was thinking justice could be bought. It can only be earned." They stayed in Nashville another week, visiting with Judge Hawthorne, Sam Brennan, Martha Henshaw, and Lieutenant Ashford, who'd been promoted to captain for his role in bringing down Blackwood's corruption ring. Then they returned to New Mexico, to their home, to their life. 2 years after their wedding, Ayanna gave birth to a daughter. They named her Margaret Ayita. Margaret for Caleb's first wife, Ayita meaning first to dance in Cherokee, honoring both the past and the future. The child was beautiful, with her mother's copper skin and her father's gray eyes. She had Ayanna's fierce spirit and Caleb's quiet strength. When Caleb held her for the first time, he wept tears he didn't bother to hide. "She's perfect," he said. "She is," Ayanna agreed, watching her husband cradle their daughter with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "Margaret would be proud of both of us." "I think she would be." Caleb kissed his daughter's forehead, then his wife's. "I think she'd be happy I found my way back to living." On Margaret Ayita's first birthday, Caleb rode out into the desert alone. He carried a small bundle, Margaret's wedding ring wrapped in cloth. He found a young cottonwood tree growing near a spring, a place of life and water in the midst of dry land. He dug a hole at the base of the tree and placed the ring inside. "I kept my promise, Margaret," he said quietly. "I lived. I found love again. I built a new life. But I never forgot you. You were my first love." my first lesson in what it meant to open my heart completely. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." He buried the ring and stood, looking out across the desert that had become his home. In the distance, he could see smoke rising from the Apache village. Ayanna would be there with their daughter, probably teaching her Apache words, even though she was too young to understand. Chief Dakota would be there, watching his granddaughter with fierce pride. The whole community that had become Caleb's family would be there. He was no longer the hermit of Smoky Mountain, hiding from pain in solitude. He was Caleb Thornwood, husband to Ayanna, father to Margaret Ayita, adopted son of Chief Dakota, member of the Apache tribe. He was a man who'd lost everything and found it again in the most unexpected place. He was home. As he rode back toward the village, he thought about the strange path his life had taken, from the peaks of Tennessee to the deserts of New Mexico, from crushing grief to overwhelming joy, from isolation to community, from death to life. All because one night, 3 years ago, he'd heard gunshots in the distance and decided not to run away. All because he'd found a wounded Apache woman and chosen to help her instead of leaving her to die. All because he'd taken a chance on caring again, on loving again, on living again. The sun was setting as he reached the village, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Ayanna stood outside their home, holding their daughter, watching for his return. When she saw him, she smiled, and that smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. "Welcome home," she called. "I am home," Caleb replied, dismounting and pulling them both into his arms. "Wherever you are, that's home." That night, after Margaret Ayita was asleep, Caleb and Ayanna sat outside under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The desert night was cool, and Ayanna leaned against Caleb's chest while he held her close. "Do you ever miss the mountains?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The smell of pine after rain, the way fog settles in the valleys at dawn. But I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss the silence. We could visit. Sam would love to see Margaret Ayita. I'd like that. Show our daughter where her father comes from, just like we've shown her your people's ways." Caleb kissed the top of Ayanna's head. She should know both sides of her heritage, mountain and desert, Cherokee and Apache, all the stories that made her who she is. "She's lucky," Ayanna said. "She gets to grow up knowing she comes from warriors and survivors on both sides. That kind of strength will serve her well." "She comes from something else too," Caleb said. "Love. The kind of love that crosses cultures and mountains and deserts. The kind that refuses to give up even when everything seems hopeless. That's her true inheritance." Years passed. Margaret Ayita grew strong and confident, learning to ride before she could properly walk, learning both Apache and English, Cherokee stories and mountain survival skills. She was joined by 2 brothers, each as beloved as the first. The cabin in Tennessee stood empty but maintained. Caleb and Ayanna visited every few years, sometimes staying for months, reconnecting with Sam and Martha and the other friends they'd made. The mountains welcomed them back like old friends, and the cabin that had once been a tomb of grief became a place of happy memories. Chief Dakota lived to see his great-grandchildren, and on his deathbed, he called Caleb to his side. "I was right to trust you with my daughter," he said, his voice weak but his eyes still bright. "You have honored your promises. You have loved her well. You have been a good father, a good son, a good man. I go to join the ancestors with peace in my heart." Caleb held the old chief's hand until the end, tears streaming down his face. Dakota had been more than a father-in-law. He'd been a teacher, a friend, a second father. His death left a hole that could never be quite filled. But life went on, as it always does. Seasons turned, children grew. The story of the mountain man and the Apache princess became legend, told around fires on cold nights, passed down through generations. And at the center of it all was a love story. Not the kind found in fairy tales, where everything is easy and perfect, but the real kind. the hard-fought kind, the kind built on sacrifice and courage and the willingness to risk heartbreak for the chance at happiness. Caleb Thornwood lived to the age of 73, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. On his last day, he lay in the dwelling he'd shared with Ayanna for more than 40 years, holding her hand just as she'd held his through countless nights. "No regrets?" she asked, her own face now lined with age but her eyes still bright. "Not one," he said honestly. "Every moment with you has been a gift." "Even the hard ones?" "Especially those. They taught us how strong we were together." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Thank you, Ayanna, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living." "I should be thanking you. You're the one who stopped that night, who chose to help a stranger instead of riding away." "Best decision I ever made." His breathing grew labored. "Promise me something." "Anything." "Keep telling our story. Make sure our grandchildren know that love can heal anything. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That sometimes the path to happiness leads through the darkest valleys, but it's worth the journey." "I promise." Ayanna leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I'll tell them every day. The story of the hermit who thought his heart had died, and the Apache woman who taught him how to live again." Caleb smiled, and it was the same smile he'd given her that first night in his cabin, full of wonder and hope and unexpected joy. Then his eyes closed for the last time, and he was gone. Ayanna lived another 10 years, watching her children's children grow, telling and retelling the story of how she and Caleb had found each other. When her own time came, she faced it with the same courage she'd shown facing Ezekiel Blackwood all those years ago. They buried her beside Caleb under a cottonwood tree that had grown from a seedling planted the day they married. On the headstone, carved in both English and Apache, were simple words: Caleb Thornwood and Ayanna. 2 hearts, 2 worlds, 1 love. They taught us that courage and kindness can change everything. And far away, in the mountains of Tennessee, an old cottonwood grew beside a spring. Buried at its roots was a gold wedding ring, a marker of a love that had ended but never been forgotten. A love that had made possible another love, greater and deeper and richer for all the pain that came before. 2 loves, 2 lives. One lesson that echoes through the generations, that the human heart, no matter how broken, can always learn to beat again. We only have to be brave enough to let it. And that, in the end, is what Caleb and Ayanna's story was really about. Not revenge or justice or tribal lands, though those were part of it. It was about healing, about hope, about the courage it takes to open your heart again after you think it's dead. It was about love, the kind that saves us, the kind that transforms us, the kind that reminds us why being alive matters. It was about coming home.